Welcome to Events Heist, the podcast game show about post-COVID events and the event managers that run them. In today's episode, you're going to hear from Hannah and Mitch. Hannah is the event manager at Fitbox. She talks about a hilarious war story involving a hangover and a septic tank. She also shares her expertise in sporting events. Mitch is the event coordinator at Max Events. Hear him talk about his fresh graduate experience and finding a job during COVID in the event space. He also shares a memorable experience he had during the Australian Open. So Hannah, you've rolled a 5. All right, Hannah, tell us a bit about how long you've been in the event space.
Wow, I've been working in events now for over 8 years, I guess. I've worked in a heap of sport, done some concerts, a heap of stuff, really. I was a late starter to the industry because I didn't go into it straight out of school. Started in uni doing journalism, of all things, and realized that I didn't really like it. Flirted around for a bit and then kind of just lucked into getting an internship with an amazing company. And yeah, things kicked off from there.
All right, Mitch, you wrote a 5.
Perfect.
We're in the same spot.
I'm joining you, Mitch.
So Mitch, how many events have you been involved in your professional career?
Oh, I'm a little bit different to Hannah. I've only sort of just freshly started in many ways. Coming out of uni at the end of 2019, a couple of years ago now. So I'm a COVID graduate is probably what's going to be known going forward.
What a time to get into the event. That's that's rough.
Yeah, as you can imagine, it was pretty tough going early days. But yeah, obviously working with Max Events now, it's been great fun. Done a whole lot of stuff over the past couple of months.
Okay, Hannah, you've wrote a 2.
No.
Same question to you. How many events do you estimate you've been involved in your professional career?
Like, certainly not hundreds like Mitch suggested. Gosh, if I would probably estimate, I guess the bulk of my career was in major events. So the frequency of them was much lower. We maybe did, say, 6 a year for the first 7. I'm going to say less than 100, probably around the 60 to 70 mark, maybe.
Mitch, you wrote a 3.
Takes a lead.
Not competitive.
Not at all.
What made you decide to go and study or to get into events? Because you were saying you just graduated 2019. What made you go into this industry?
Yeah, it's actually sort of halfway through my degree, because I did a double degree in sports science and business sports management. So about halfway through, I started focusing more on the business side of sport. And then I guess in my final year, I did an events management subject, and the teacher is currently the operations lead at the Big Bash League. And she sort of taught some very good stuff. And I learned a lot from her in that class and developed a bit of a passion for it there. And then sort of networked with her a little bit and got to know a bit more about what she does. And nowadays I'm a very passionate events person. I'm working in Max Events, which works with various different sporting clubs across the country. So we get to do a lot of different cool stuff.
Tell me about the first event you remember organizing.
I'll go with professional. And it wasn't necessarily that I organized it solely, but the first event I interned on will forever sit in my memory because it was a concert for a band that I loved as a kid growing up. So we were doing a support concert for the V8 Supercar Gold Coast race, and it happened to feature Good Charlotte, who to this day I still love and adore. And I got that first oh my god moment watching them sound check and me standing in front of the barrier, in front of the stage, and just looking out at these guys with no one else in the venue. It's just me standing there in the grass going, I'm never going to forget this moment.
Tell me what you love and or hate about events.
What do I love about it? I guess in my space, I love match days more so than anything, probably, getting to be out on the field in and amongst it, with the headset on, relaying information back and forward. That's probably the most enjoyable thing that I'm experiencing at the moment in my role.
What's your favorite post-event junk food, drink, or de-stressing event?
I'm a bit of a weirdo. I feel like I eat all my junk food in event week, and then by the end of the event, I'm craving vegetables.
Oh, wow. I'm going to ask you the same question. Post-event, junk food, drink, de-stress activity.
A recent one for me actually has been Guzmani Gomez. There's sort of a new
Oh, I
store that's
love.
popped up on the way home, and it's just like, 11 o'clock at night, 12 o'clock at night on the way home after a match day. You just can't not turn off and go and get some Guzmani Gomez. So I have been delving into some burritos recently on the way home.
So what do you love or hate about events?
Gosh, I'm probably going to echo the same as Mitch in terms of the hate aspects. I think the life work balance can sometimes become very tricky because it's an industry where a lot of passionate people exist, and therefore it's easy to overextend and sort of get a little bit lacking of balance. What I love about the industry, honestly, I genuinely feel like it's an honor to be given the faith by people who attend events that their time can't be reinvested in any other way. So I feel like the burden of that responsibility quite heavily, but really I consider it a privilege.
Have you met any celebrities on the job, and what were they like?
Rubbing shoulders with the likes of Steve Smith on different match days has been pretty cool. It's sort of a cool story around him is that working for the Stars one day, they played the Sixers at the MCG. After one of the games, I was fortunate enough to grab a stress ball, as they like to call, from him. And I decided to pass that on to someone into the crowd. And when I did that, you go up to the fence, everyone gets excited because they know that you've got a stress ball and that it's signed by someone, but they don't know who. So all of a sudden I'm handing it to this little girl who's probably, 5 or 7. And I go, now listen to me very carefully. This ball is signed by Steve Smith. And then all of a sudden, everyone around you is just going and takes in that deep breath of like, oh my God, how lucky are you? And that's probably one of my most memorable experiences in terms of working at a sporting event.
Describe the moment
that
you knew COVID was going to turn the industry upside down.
March 13th, 2022. I remember it clear as day. Yeah. 100%.
The date, the exact date and time. So yeah, tell us about it.
Yeah, I remember sitting in the office with the team that I was working with. At the time, we were working on a track cycling event that was meant to be held in Brisbane, although I was working out of Melbourne. And that was the day in the press conference that they announced that the 500 packs capacity was coming into events. And I knew that second that I had lost my job. Damn. And yeah, it was not a great day for all of us. I was a contractor, to be fair. Look, the employer was absolutely brilliant, doing everything they could to keep us on. But this was such early days that it was predating JobKeeper. So we were laid off well in advance of the travel industry getting shut down.
Talk me through when you graduated and then going into an industry that was just like in turmoil. Like, tell me a bit about that.
End of 2019, I graduated. In February, the 14th of February, I had my graduation ceremony, and 2 days after that, I actually flew out to Europe for a little bit of a holiday. So that obviously, as you can imagine, didn't last long because COVID hit, as Hannah said, sort of March over here. So I was actually escaping countries and, jumping border closures, international border closures over in Europe for sort of a month's time. Ended up making my way back home in, I think it was the 20th of March or something like that. And then obviously came back to basically a non-existent, not only event, but just like world in some ways where, lots of things were closed, everything was locked down.
What industries have you done events for, and what was your favorite?
I could rattle off the list of sports I've worked in. So let's see. So there's car racing and motorcycle racing. I've done some swimming, rugby league. Then there's concerts and festivals, road racing, mass participation running. And now I'm more in the fitness and gym space. So yeah, favorite. Ooh, it's hard to say. I mean, there's not a lot at the level of passion when it comes to fans compared to motorsport. I think 2 and 4 wheels that I've worked in, the fans around that space is what makes those events very special. And that's just like next level. Like I love footy as well myself, but motorsport fans are something else.
So tell me about the most stressful event that you've been involved in.
Australian Open, purely just because of the timing of the event. In terms of it being, Melbourne had sort of just coming out of lockdown where it was, we were in a really tricky spot. And then all of a sudden we did go into lockdown back in Melbourne, but the Australian Open was still running, and to sort of, look at the media around that event and sort of what was happening in that space, and then, be able to still go to work at that event was very, interesting to some extent. And then also the parameters around it in terms of, the zones that were implemented and, the safety precautions around the event as well. Like, that's probably the most stressful event in terms of, making sure you're doing everything right so that, you weren't that one person who all of a sudden had a case at the Australian Open, because obviously that would have just been an absolute nightmare and an absolute, chaos for the event. So that's probably the most stressful one I've had.
Tell me about your fantasy event.
So we in Australia have an event, a semi-final event that qualifies to the international games. And it's run out of Brisbane by a couple of guys who do a phenomenal job. And I was lucky enough to do some experience working with them a couple of months ago on that event. And they set an incredibly high bar. Like, it's amazing. But should the chance ever come to have a second one of those in our market, I would love to be involved in that. So that's kind of linking up my experience and my passion and my personal interests all together, kind of thing. I think Melbourne would be a great place for it.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask you the same one. Fantasy event, no limitations to budget, venue, subject, nothing, just fantasy, pure fantasy event.
I think with what we've seen with hubs recently, if you can get some sort of, all-star series, whether it's football five-a-side, whether it's NBA, that sort of style of event, I think that would be incredible. Having like Lionel Messi team up with Ronaldo, team up with Mbappe in a 5-on-5 football tournament, I think that would be kind of
I would
amazing.
Watch it. Yeah. None of you hit a manhole yet. That's like very rare.
Now when we do, it's because you've jinxed us.
I was about to say, I'm rolling next and there's two in front of me.
Fab, you do know the number one rule of events, right?
No, I don't know the number one rule. So yeah, explain it to me.
You are never allowed to say on an event site that the radios are quiet.
The radios are quiet, as in like there's no disasters happening right now.
Radio's really quiet. Like, yeah, exactly. Nothing's going on. You don't say it out loud. Gotcha. Something will go wrong if you say that.
See, I've never done live events, so that's not something I'm familiar with. So, what is your emergency kit during an event?
Always an extra muesli bar, just in case. You don't want to get hungry on an event day. That's never a good look. See, it's hard because, normally there's a lot of stuff provided by stadiums. So for me, it's kind of like, well, if I ever need anything, I can always ask. So, always take the USB hard drive computer, just in case anything goes wrong on the day. You can always, have the backups ready.
Hannah's go, you rolled a 4. There you go. Oh, see, that's the game. That's the game I remember. So if you could have an event pet, right? Can be real. Imagine, it doesn't matter. Like any event pet that's going to help you during an event, what would it be?
I'm a huge dog person. I warn people that Hannah with dogs is not the normal Hannah. I love dogs.
How are sporting events coping, and what are they doing?
We're definitely
in the virtual
seeing
event space.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing a lot of sports teams, clubs pivot a lot recently, especially. Especially in Melbourne, like we work a lot with Melbourne Victory at the moment, and they were meant to have their players best and fairest MVP night, and that unfortunately couldn't go ahead because we're in lockdown. And it's like, well, they can't in some ways not have the event because obviously they still want to celebrate the year that was and reward the players who had great seasons. So what's the next best alternative? All right, let's do it virtually and, record it in a studio to some extent and, have a link go out to all the people who would have been invited and they can jump on and watch it live, sort of thing.
Okay, Hannah, you're
Lifelining.
8?
Lifelining.
Oh, you're lifelining. Okay, you go. Okay,
Heck
wait.
Yeah.
If you watched a movie or TV show, read a book that would be interesting to other event profs, but now I'm going to ask that to Mitch.
Just because I only saw it recently and I am a bit of a Marvel nut, so I'm going to take this a little bit more personal and fun as opposed to serious, but I did recently go and see Scarlett Johansson in Black Widow. And, as a Marvel nut, of course, I loved it. So I would highly recommend and encourage anyone who isn't a Marvel nut to go out and watch all 20 movies, I think it is now, 20 plus movies, and get right into it because, you know, I'm a bit of a superhero fan, so I'm not afraid to say that I very much enjoyed that movie.
Yeah, what's your take on the virtual events, hybrid events in the sporting area?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've seen a bit of it in sport, but I'm currently working in, I guess, a bit more of the corporate space. So
Okay.
in my current role with rolling out a government-funded project, which will include a webinar series, which we're delivering online. And I think from that perspective, it's great because being based in Brisbane, we can have participants from regional areas to still take part. So in that way, you know, virtual events, it's not new in that regard, but I think everyone's attitude towards them is really what's changed since COVID. And that makes it really a better thing for us because there's more uptake, there's less hesitancy, there's more trust around delivering stuff online.
Do you have any good war stories? Any good event war stories?
Not sure if it's a war story per se, but one experience that I did get to have actually this year, which is, you know, funny to think about considering the circumstances we're living in now. But Anzac Day, we got to go up to Darwin and help to assist and run the Parramatta Eels Darwin game against the Broncos, from memory it was. So, you know, in terms of war stories, Darwin, you would think in April would be somewhat cool, but I tell you, it definitely was not. It was 35 plus degrees and 95 or whatever it was % humidity. So we were quite fortunate, I think, that some clouds came in a little bit towards the afternoon and we got to sort of be in a little bit of shade, even though it wasn't that much cooler. It still helped a little bit because in the sun, it was, not a lot of fun.
What's the weirdest food you've ever eaten at an event?
I don't know if there'd be a weird one. I feel like I want to shout out somebody at this point, like not as a weird one, but as a good provider. But I don't think I've ever eaten anything weird. But I will say, Fran the Pizza Man, if you've been to any major event up the East Coast, you will have seen wood-fired pizzas. That man is a gem. He is a gift to society, and his pizzas are fantastic.
Awesome. If you could have an unlimited supply of just one thing during an event, what would it be?
Probably not a good thing, but probably snakes, to be honest. I would go ham on those. Like there's no tomorrow. And probably not in a good way either. I'd be just constantly having those in my mouth.
So for our international audience, which many are, can you explain what snakes are? Because Australia talking about snakes can be very scary for them. Okay.
Yeah, you got a fair point there. They're basically just lollies, I guess. It's probably one way of putting it. But
that look like snakes, which
exactly.
Which is pretty funny considering it's a favorite in Australia, right? It's exactly what you want to avoid.
Yeah, I think just riding that sugar high throughout the night or, you know, day would probably be a good thing in some ways.
Do you have any funny, crazy event stories you'd like to share?
In the role that I was in, for us, the big day is the day after the event. We're doing bump out. That's the busiest time. And I think from memory, I had rolled in from this after party at about 4 a.m. to be on site at very, very early. I'll just clear out quickly. I was not intoxicated. I was definitely on the waters from about 1 o'clock, but that's all good. And it was a drizzly, coldish day. No, it wasn't cold. It was hot. It was a drizzly, hot day, which is exactly what you want with a hangover, isn't it? And I was determined that I was not hungover. I was going to prove to my block. I'm like, no, I went out. I went to the party, but it's fine. I can do this. I've got this. And I had it till about 1 p.m. And the crash hit like nothing else you could picture. I'm about 4 copies deep at this point. My phone rings and it's the boss. And he's like, hey, Han, I have a job I need you to do. And I just need you to help us out with this. And my response at that point was, oh God, what is going on? And we have toilet blocks in our events, right? And some of these toilet blocks have tanks and some of them connect directly into the sewer. When you disconnect the sewer connected toilet from the sewer, you're supposed to put a cap on the end of the thing. And when you don't, and somebody accidentally uses that toilet, the stuff goes somewhere. And so I, with a raging hangover, had to go deal with somebody else's poop in the middle of a public park.
All right. So if you could have any speaker or celebrity at your event, dead or alive, who Who would it be?
I've gotten into a little bit of a podcast recently. It's called the High Performance Podcast, and it's done by Jake Humphrey. And he basically just talks to, it's based in the UK, and he basically talks with people who had high performance lives in some ways. So some of them come from sport, or most of them have come from sport. Some of them more sort of businessy as well. But just some of the experiences that he's had. He also works for, I'm going to get this wrong. I don't want to say who he works for because I might get it wrong, but he commentates on football over in the UK as well. So he's gotten to meet some really cool people and got to talk to some really cool people and get their insights and stuff like that. So to have him at an event and to hear him speak would be pretty cool from my point of view.
What do you think the future of events looks like in sporting in Australia?
I think it's such a revered institution in Australian culture that the push is to reinstate the norm as quickly as possible. For sure, there would be hybrid elements. I think it would be super cool to see AR events in the sports space. Like the economies of scale for that are just a no-brainer for me. But I think from a cultural perspective, that's still decades away for us.
All right, Mitch, you rolled a 9.
Perfect.
So when you're at an event, what do you secretly desire the most?
I think. See, yeah,
Tell me I'm a liar.
Sometimes, not all the time. Sometimes. No, I think probably fan engagement is probably the one that I thought of straight away, because I know that like it's been very hard when you go to sports recently, especially, and there's capacity caps on crowds, and you've got all this stuff planned out that's fan engagement involved, whether it's quizzes, whether it's little fun games to showpiece that sort of event in the lead up and to keep fans engaged while it's halftime or whatever, and not being able to get as much feedback from those interactions as you might like, just purely because there's not as many people in the stadium as you might normally like to see. That always makes it difficult and tough, especially when you're expecting to get reactions or to get involvement from the crowd, and there just isn't the same take or bite, I guess, in some ways.
I mean, you rolled a 5, so you're going to bounce off the door. Do you use any events jargon in your personal life?
Way too much.
I thought you
Copy.
might.
I use copy way too much all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, still to this day.
Like literally anyone writes anything and you're like, I don't like that copy. Is that how you use it?
No. As in if you agree with somebody or they give you a direction.
Like radio.
Go do that.
Yeah.
Copy.
Yeah. Tell me about esports, how it's expanding, like what it looks like globally, and how long do you think, or what's the penetration here in Australia?
I think it's just such a big domain, because obviously, like, for example, just giving myself an example, right? I grow up obviously playing a bit of sport, wanting to be an athlete. Obviously, you get to a certain age and you realize that's not going to happen. So what's the direct alternative? All of a sudden,
I was 5 when that happened, when I realized it wasn't going to happen.
But all of a sudden, you get to a point, you go, okay, what's the next best alternative in some ways to being able to sort of almost feel like you're part of it? And I guess the way that FIFA has done it so well in terms of career mode and being able to, build yourself as a player and, play for different clubs and stuff. It's just that augmented reality, like we spoke about before, where, you get to experience it, but also you're obviously not living it.
Okay, so Hannah, you rolled a 5. Tell me about, what's your favorite TV show at the moment?
I'm actually watching Sex Life right now. I just finished Lucifer. I was very late to the party on that one. But yeah, now currently delving into my latest Netflix obsession, which is Sex Life.
Mitch, you wrote a 4. If you could give one piece of advice for planning a great sporting event, what would it be?
Know your fan. Probably the biggest one, I think, in some ways. I think because obviously across different codes and across different sports, the fans differ, even just across different teams even. So I think the most important thing when sort of building an event, doesn't matter what that is in some ways, but is to know your fan and know who the event is for primarily. Because obviously there'll always be people who aren't necessarily your target market who are also going to enjoy that event or be interested in it.
All right, Hannah, you rolled a 3, and since we're on the hour, you have reached the mint and you are the winner. I want to ask you the same question I asked Mitch. At an event, when you're physically there, what do you secretly desire the most?
Definitely sleep. A secret sleeping
Sleep.
spot.
That's a good one.
Almost always sleep. if not like a really comfy pair of shoes, or an endless supply of coffee, like good coffee.
Well, look, thanks so much. So we've hit the hour. Thanks so much for being guests of Events Heist. It's been great having you on.